Welcome. If you are the meeting host,
Good morning, Commissioners. This is Sean.
Morning, Sean.
This is Jen.
Morning, Jen.
Morning.
This is Matt.
Morning, Matt.
Good morning. It is 9 o'clock. It's Tuesday, May 25th. We have a full slate of commissioners here excuse me, thought I silenced that thing. And I will call the meeting to order. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, the first thing on the agenda here is the approval of the minutes from May 11th. Is there any additions, changes, or corrections?
No additions.
Okay. Next on the agenda is the Commissioner Administrator updates. Keith, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Time's going by very quickly. It's difficult to imagine we're almost into June. A lot going on. A couple of brief updates. We have received all of the names for the redistricting commission, and we're establishing contact with those individuals to set up a preliminary meeting to kind of go over what the expectations are, give them an update to the training that WASAC provided to all of the counties across the state, and kind of formulate the framework of what work expectations and meeting frequency and public hearings will look like over the next few months as they get geared up to make recommendations to the board. We also, on the salary commission, have put out letters. We have not had a great response in terms of a number of people. I think we put out 30 letters in each of the commissioner districts. We've only gotten a couple of those back. And then with the members that have to have certain professional qualifications, we've not yet received any applications. So we may have to go back out with a second round of requests. HR staff is working on that as well. A big topic of discussion right now, as you're aware through our WhatsApp calls, is the American Rescue Plan Act and the funds that are coming to the county, how we're going to allocate that. I'll be meeting with the treasurer and the auditor to set up some parameters or recommendations that will be brought before the board for consideration. We've got some suggestions already, and those things will be brought for formal approval to the board at a future date. We are aware of the recent changes that the CDC has recommended regarding masking. We're trying to make sure that we comply with the rules of the state and federal government with respect to mask requirements. Essentially, those that are fully vaccinated are now being exempt from a lot of masking requirements, but we still have an obligation to make sure that we're following state L&I rules. They just I think it was on Friday, put out some guidance for employers to use with respect to how they engage in mask policies and have those in effect for people visiting the courthouse. So we'll be issuing some guidance to each of our departments and making sure that they're compliant. But we look forward to soon being rid of masks and as people get vaccinated and that goes forward. A lot of work around economic development. Our .09 fund applications are going to be due into our committee this week. And so then the committee will meet and make recommendations to come back before the board in a meeting in June. So those are kind of the big things I'm working on at the moment.
Commissioner Peck.
Well, a lot of the typical meetings for a week this time of year met with the local decision makers, local mayors mostly, on COVID issues and what the cities are doing and making sure we're in alignment with the county. Had a electronic meeting with the governor's office on COVID matters. Nick Struley and others from the governor's office, along with several of my commissioner peers from around the state. All the information that you're hearing in the general public and reporting is consistent with what we're hearing there, that they're waiting to see how the reduction of masking in phase 3 is going to play out in terms of infection rates. So far, the trend is looking better. Popped in just for a short time with the state, 911 advisory committee. It's one I used to actively participate in, but no longer. I think I'm still listed as an alternate with WASAC, so I check in on them occasionally. Council of Governments for Benton and Franklin counties and all the cities therein. We had 2 meetings, the Economic Development meeting on Friday, several $100,000 grant for brownfield studies on how to take former industrial sites like the petroleum facility along the Columbia River in Pasco and return those to a brownfield study site that then can be used for development. Council of Governments Board of Directors meeting, fairly routine business there, although we are looking at the Rural Revolving Loan Fund, which is federally funded for small startup businesses and to maintain existing small businesses. We are evaluating what the utility of that is and whether or not it might be better placed with HAFIC, working on the bylaws for the organization as well. Let's see, a virtual meeting with WASAC on Monday. Probably an inordinate number of phone calls from constituents this week on easements and permits. One of the easements we're talking about today. A couple of good conversations with members of the city council in Pasco on our comp plan, county's perspective, their wishes, and also on some annexation plans relative to the comp plan. And then meeting with the Port of Pasco, which was fairly routine other than some new policy on construction at the airport, lease terms, and the use of fueling operations at the airport.
Commissioner Mullen?
Had a meeting with Pasco Chamber of Commerce at a tri-deck orientation and a long-term care meeting. And just wanted to speak a little bit on the Long-Term Care Act for Washington State. It's going to be a new tax that's going to be 0.58% of your payroll. You have the opportunity to opt out of this program, and at this moment, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opt-out. So you either opt out or you're going to pay into this as long as you work in Washington State. And I encourage you to do your due diligence and look into it, because once you opt out, you can never opt back into it. And also, there are some other items that you might want to look at. If you're going to retire in less than 10 years, you will not be eligible to collect on it, but you will pay into it. It also has a lifetime maximum payout of $36,500. At this moment, your opt-out has to be done by November 1st, and you have to have a long-term care policy in place in order to opt out. So there are some considerations that you want to definitely make sure that that's going to be what you're wanting to do. Currently in the program, there is nothing that prevents you from dropping out of your long-term care policy after you've been exempted out. A couple of the other things to think about is if you retire and move out of the state of Washington, those that policy will not be, you will not be able to use it outside of Washington State once you retire. If you move out of the state of Washington, it's null and void. So anyways, that date is slowly approaching. They're encouraging everyone to make sure that you have your policy in place during the month of June, because if you wait too long, you're obviously not going to meet that deadline. So just want to reiterate the fact that it's coming and that everybody is fully aware of it. Thank you.
Commissioner, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do you know if the option is available now, or is there a time period you can begin to exercise that option for those that want out?
It's between October 1st and November 1st, I believe is your time that you have that you can opt out of the program.
You know, I see Carly is here. That's a little different than I recall. Maybe we could ask.
From my understanding, at this time, you have to have a voluntary plan in place by November 1st. They're supposed to open up the opt-out process, I believe, by October 1st of this year, and then you have through next year to apply for that exemption, though that tax will start coming January 1st if you don't let your employer know that you're exempt. And that's, the state has not yet defined what that opt-out request process looks like. So that's kind of where we're kind of in limbo there while they work on the regs and the administrative processes. But the date to keep in mind is that November 1st date is when you have to have a plan in place. And, you know, underwriting does take some time. So that would be why the urgency right now.
So October 1 to November 1 is the date you have to opt out.
It's conflicting because the opt-out period is between October 1st and December 31st of 2022.
Right.
But you have to opt out by November 1st. It's a once in a lifetime opt-out process. So even their own rules kind of contradict each other.
Well, you
November 1st.
you don't have to complete the opt-out application by November 1st. You have to have a plan in place by November 1st.
And file for the exemption.
And
Unless,
file for the exemption, but you can file for the exemption anytime between October 1st and December 31st of 2022. Like I said, if you wait until, if you have a plan in place and then you don't get the paperwork done and you don't get that filed with the state till February, well, then you'll start paying that tax January 1st. And then once you present your exemption information to your employer, then that at that point you would be opted out of the tax.
so we're talking 2 Novembers, November 21 and November 22, but we're talking November 21 to opt out, correct?
November 1st, 2021 is the date when you have to have a voluntary plan in place to be eligible to apply to opt out.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for
Yeah,
clarifying.
you bet.
Because
I know,
like I said,
it's-
when you read it, it seems very convoluted because if you have to have your policy in place by November 1st, if you don't, you can't apply for the exemption.
Yeah, and as usual, the state is kind of building the plane as they fly it.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
we do the best we can. And in terms of, Franklin County employees, as soon as we have that information, we will get them out. The enrollment period is open for the voluntary option that the county is sponsoring. Employees have received some communication about that. That application period goes until early July.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
All righty. This last week, the budget committee was canceled. The Ben Franklin Health Department meeting was canceled. And that, I find that hard to stomach with the fact that we've got so many issues with our society with this pandemic. So with that, we had the finance committee meeting, which I've got the printout here, and we are doing very well in Franklin County. Actually, the 2021 year is, we're up over 7 million in our current cash reserves, which is due to the fact that we're getting the money in from the federal government. We have had a banner year for some of the proceeds that are coming in here too. Our property tax isn't suffering at all, or as far as collection. This Thursday, I also attended the WASAC meeting Monday and listened to it. Thursday, I got the Columbia River Caucus meeting, the MAC meeting, and the Housing Authority meeting coming up. So with that, we will move on to the public hearing to vacate of easement 2021-01. And at this point in time, I open the public I open to the public this public hearing. Go ahead, Derek.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is relatively straightforward. This is a request to vacate an easement that is located. It's kind of one of these, the easement only serves two properties. They were one of multiple potential access, ingress, egress, and utility easements. The request is by Monica, or the realtors are the people that are actually applying, were the applicants acting as agents for the landowners. Basically what happened is the Kohler property where the easement actually lies is having a boundary line adjustment and other things that make this irrelevant. They have access, the two properties have access still from the south for lot 2 and from the north for lot 3. So it's a redundant access easement. They're asking for it to be vacated. Staff did not see any issues associated with it because, again, it's only for these two properties. It's not part of our network or our systems, transportation system network. Like I said, relatively straightforward. We've received no comments. I had a couple calls asking about it, but once I explained what the purpose was, they're like, oh, okay, thank you. It was just informational requests. So it's, again, it's a private access to serve two lots. Both parties have relinquished their, or submitted documents to relinquish that, and it's relatively straightforward. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions?
Eric, I just want to clarify a few things. The applicant is actually listed as AHBL, acting on behalf of the property owners, Jeff Graff and Vicky Montagudo. And you referenced realtors.
I'm sorry.
I'm only seeing one applicant, and it's from AHBL. As I understand it, just let me, for the sake of time, let me run through what I think I read here. And if I get any of it wrong, just stop me, and it'll be a lot quicker that way.
Excellent.
Okay, so the two parcels that are served by this easement are the ones that are west of the easement. The easement itself is on a parcel owned by Kohler.
Correct.
The beneficiaries of the easement, again, are the two parcels to the west labeled, I think, lots 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
And the Kohlers aren't represented here because it's an easement against their property. It's not their easement. And
Correct.
You've not received, as you just said, any complaints or concerns, right?
Correct.
Okay. That's I referenced earlier, I had some calls, actually 2 calls, but they were from the same person. And the primary concern was whether or not this was an easement vacation that would somehow impact the public's access to the river. Because I think it was listed, at least in the package, as not only a utility, but a public ingress egress. And so my last question is, was that just a glitch in the paperwork? Because typically, in this case, I would have expected the easement to be for the benefit of the 2 named parcels and for ingress egress to those parcels, not for public access to and from those. So was it a public easement or for the benefit of those parcels?
Everything that I saw indicated it's benefit of those parcels, not
Okay.
not public.
All right.
It doesn't go anywhere.
In either case, I don't think there's a reason to be concerned about it. It doesn't really provide a public access anywhere other than other private properties. So
Correct.
that's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have any questions.
No other questions. Is there anybody on the phone on this? Keith? Anybody from the public? This is a public hearing. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, move for approval of Resolution 2021-112 entitled Before the Board of Commissioners, Franklin County, Washington, in the matter of county planning and building. Move for approval as presented.
I'll second that.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.
All right, next we got the remodel of the, forgot to close the public hearing. I closed the public hearing. but the vote still stands. Okay. Next, we'll move on to the remodel of the assessors and human resource offices. Keith, you're going to present?
Yes, sir. Yeah, shortly after Mr. Rosenau took office, he made the positive gesture of assessing their needs in the assessor's office and recognizing that their current office configuration was not conducive to their current mission of being able to handle taxpayer privacy issues and as well as some of the COVID distancing issues that were necessary in their office. So he initiated a proposal to do some remodeling of their office configuration in the basement part of the courthouse. As you know, HR also has offices on the basement, and we've worked with Mr. Rosenau and Carly in HR to formulate a proposal before the board today. This was done with Jen Wagner's assistance and getting some information on what it would cost us to do some remodeling, try to minimize the amount of construction work that would be necessary to accommodate the needs of both the HR and the assessor's office going forward. And so we have a proposal now that we'd like the board to authorize to move us forward with that so that kind of the long-term interests of the assessor's office can be met, as well as continuing to meet the needs of the HR office. Both Carly and John are here today. I suppose they can comment or answer questions that the board may have for them, but submitted in the board packet was a drawing of what we anticipate those modifications to be in the HR and assessors section of the basement, and estimated cost of around $50,000 to pay for that construction. And if we can get authorization from the board, we would move with a plan of timing where it can fit within the office work so it's not disruptive any more than it has to be. We think this is a fairly minor public works construction project, but it will have some impact on their day-to-day operations. We want to minimize that interruption time as much as we can. Glad to answer any questions you may have.
Questions, commissioners?
Well, I'll just start with, I think of those of us here, I'm the only one that was here back when this was the planning office. Seen a few changes since then, but as I look at this and I remind myself that we pride ourselves in being fiscally conservative and stewards of the taxpayers, and I realize we've got people out in a World War II vintage, it might be kind to call it a trailer, doing our planning and permitting, who moved out of these nice offices, that I'm not inclined to spend $50,000 in taxpayer money to do this. I'd rather see that money go to improving the working conditions out in the planning department in that World War II structure that came out of these offices. And it seems to me that if you look at the diagram of the offices and you look where it says new assessor, simply putting a short wall between there to separate would nearly double the square footage for the assessor's office and do it at minimal cost and still leave an appropriate functional HR department without having the cost and turmoil of uprooting people from two different offices and all the computer switching and electronics that go with it. I just don't think it's the efficient solution to a relatively minor problem by comparison to the working conditions of some of our other people. So my recommendation is that the wall go right across where it says new assessor, and then they can make improvements to that large open space as needed to accommodate their team. I mean, this proposal actually advocates taking out portions of a wall that were done when the historic restoration of the courthouse was done, moving it 2 or 3 feet to the side, building in an office. It's quite a bit of work, and it's not the most appropriate use of $50,000 in my opinion.
I see we got our assessor and our HR. Would you like to comment to that?
So we actually had taken a look at what Commissioner Peck has recommended there. And if it would have met the needs, that would have been our recommendation. It actually doesn't meet the needs because it still confines staffing that is trying to deal with the public and help with the public in a much smaller area. We cannot add staff where the public needs to be waited upon and provide privacy for the senior citizens and some of the people that are coming in doing some pretty extensive, providing a lot of extensive information on their personal taxes and incomes, investments, and all of that. So had it have been as simple as adding the one wall, maybe knocking out the hole to give us more access, we would have made that recommendation, but it just does not meet the requirements for what we would need and have any ability for proper growth.
If I may, before
Certainly.
we go, I'd like to just take these one at a time because you're talking about privacy for meeting with your customers. Do you feel that HR's need for privacy and meeting with employees is any less than your need for privacy meeting with taxpayers?
No, but they would be putting in offices that would allow them to have that privacy as part of the construction, which would meet the HR needs going forward as well.
And wouldn't that also meet your need for privacy?
If we wanted to add offices and tear out more walls, the actual construction, if we were to keep the same footprint that we have and just put a wall over in the HR area, the actual construction that would be required to meet those needs and provide the ability for staff to wait on individuals through that access area would actually be a greater construction cost and more construction than the method that we're recommending.
So as I'm looking at the drawing with the yellow line showing the privacy office, if you did that and put the short wall between the current HR and new assessor, you'd have nearly double the square footage. You'd have a private office to meet with people right at the entrance to your main office. What need would not be met at that point?
Well, at that point in time, we still only have room then for 2 individual clerks that are waiting on people. And that is not going to be satisfactory with the growth and the of this county. 2 individuals, basically deputy assessors that are waiting on people, just is not enough to be able to meet the needs and wait on people at the counters, as well as draw them into some private area and wait on them.
So the private area in this case would be right at the front door. So I'm not sure that you'd
Well,
have
that
to
one,
draw them far.
you're referring to the one that the yellow line is there, that was to meet the HR need, correct?
Well, and as we've discussed, it's the same need that you have, privacy with your customers. So I'm just making the parallel that if you had that wall there, it would serve your privacy need as well as it would serve HR's, vice versa.
But it would eliminate an individual from being
Well, but
able to
that's-
see and wait on the counter as well.
And that's what I was just looking at, is because right next to that space between there and the current assessor's office is a large workspace with a counter height and visibility. And then directly in front of you, as you walk in the front door, there's an admin area there that serves 2, if not 3 spaces. So I'm hard pressed to see that there isn't room there. I always was given the impression by your predecessors that the concern was more space for appraisers that were currently in the back of the office, and adding this space on the HR side would give plenty of space for workspace for them as well.
Yeah, that would be if we weren't anticipating a need for additional growth for front clerk people, which we're way behind.
How many front clerks do you think you need?
Well, we have 2 currently plus the chief deputy. That's it. Then we have our GIS individual, which is mapping and used to be under the IS department.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to wait on the customers, we have the chief deputy, which actually, when they're trying to deal with HR issues and so forth, have their back to employees walking by to be able to see visibly anything that they shouldn't be seeing. And then we only have 2 clerks. That's it. We have 2 individuals to meet that. That's why when I came to the commissioners earlier and said, if you take a comparison to this county, to all the other counties in relationship to percentages, parcels, assessments, comparing it to any of the other court offices, we're down between 45 and 60% on staffing.
Yeah, well,
Now,
I don't
we
think.
don't need to meet that, have that high of a number, but
No, you're
we are
talking to
down.
the guy. You're talking to the guy who has advocated for staffing for this office for a decade. So
Correct.
we can skip that.
It's like you mentioned, it's prima facie.
Well, that's
It's-
right.
In and of itself, it's
So-
evidence.
So what I'm looking at though is that there's an awful lot of space here when you build a simple wall where I'm talking about and add that small office in the front.
It
To me,
does, but it puts the people in that back room not where they can actually assist.
Well, I'm glad you said
Yeah.
that because those people that would be up front, the chief deputy, for example, if the chief deputy were in the current assessor's office, you'd have room for at least 4 people serving customers coming in. How many do you anticipate would be in the role of serving customers coming to the county? More than 4?
Minimum of 4. Minimum of 4 for the front office. And that's if we're conservative, not based on the statistical data that would support more.
So are you
And that's
using a number?
currently, that's with no future growth.
Yeah.
That's current needs, not future growth. The plan as it's presented will allow us to grow to approximately 14 to 15 employees from the 11 that are approved at this time or that we currently have. So, and at one time, Commissioner, the assessor's office actually prior to building and planning had that entire lower floor. Clear over to where HR is now, that whole section, clear over to where they currently are, was all the assessor's office at one time
Sure.
and
So
was pulled back.
our former assessors, Mr. Marks and Mr. McInderfer, prided themselves on constraining the cost to the citizens through personnel costs in that office. You're, of course, talking to a guy who's worked across the hall from this office and observed the traffic for 13 years. There's a time during the tax period when people have just received their notices and they're coming in to talk, when yes, it is very busy. The rest of the year, I cannot fathom the need for 4 people working that counter. Are
Well,
you telling me that day
I
to
would
day
encourage you
outside
to
of?
come and sit in our office and watch.
Yeah, well, I
you
just
know.
might do that.
Yeah, because it
But I've been-
definitely is needed.
I've been watching it for more than a decade.
Yeah.
And the traffic is light most of the time, unless an awful lot has changed in the last 6 months, but I'm going to come find out.
Yeah, it's definitely, and I think any of the staff that are there, including the chief assessor, I know that she has voiced the same concern, even to you personally, about how short a staff they are. So,
Yeah.
in any case,
and
the
to be clear-
presentation that we put forward is what we feel is in the best interest of serving the citizens of the county and being able to meet the needs now and probably for the next 5-6 years. Beyond that, there's going to be additional growth and needs that are going to need to be met.
So to be clear, I'm happy for our employees to have good, safe, pleasant, effective workspace. But I'm also mindful of the fact that there's a whole lot of other employees that are working in far less grand workspaces. And I'm particularly concerned about the conditions out in the planning department where we
Understand.
interface with an awful lot of people. And 50,000 is a lot. I'll say again, I think we can accomplish the vast majority of what needs to be done here with a lot less money and a lot less disruption. And I just don't support the plan. I know others do, but as is my habit, I speak my mind, and I think the money is better spent elsewhere.
Understand.
And I think there's a real equity issue with our other employees. Thanks.
Commissioner Mullen?
Well, I would agree that we need to address the public works area. But I think that Mr. Rosenau has shown that he has done the due diligence as far as planning for our growth and having the spaces we're going to eventually need. And if we're going to make the change, we should do so in a manner that's going to be withstand the growth and provide the room that is necessary for the additional employees that are going to be put in his office. And I approve of the resolution that is being put forward today.
And I just want to add that you brought up a good point, and that was the fact that I am concerned about our employees too, but you're concerned about the taxpayer and their confidentiality when they come in and speak to you.
Absolutely.
And I think that is of the utmost importance. So I'm in agreement with this too.
And I would also note that Conference Room 5, right outside the door of your office, is a great place to meet privately with taxpayers as well, and it already exists.
It does when it's available, and we
Sure.
have used it for different things, but it's a little difficult to.
Sure.
We have to get every employee in our office to
Just as a
have
backup.
access there to be able to pull up all their data because it's not everybody shares that computer that's in there. Only a couple of us do.
Yeah. I would
Yes.
note, we don't even have Wi-Fi in the planning department building.
No, I'm not saying there isn't needs. And one of the final things on the resolution you'll see that was listed in there is the fact that it may be that funds from the American Rescue Plan may be readily available for that, and hopefully, possibly your building and planning department out there.
Our building, yes.
Well, yes, it is. It's ours. But I have a specific duty to the office that I'm serving in.
Oh, I understand.
Okay.
I was
Okay.
making the point that I was giving you credit for having the same equity concern that I do. In essence, that you're as concerned about our other employees as I am.
And that's why we did our due diligence looking around. So,
Well, lastly, I'll just close with, if it were my building and my money, I'd find a more cost-effective way to do it, which is just build that small wall. Gives you tons of room. You can still have the private office up front, but
Yeah.
that's my piece.
So with that, I would entertain a motion.
Make a motion that we approve resolution 2021-115.
And I'll second for the sake of discussion.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion.
I'm opposed, and I've already said my piece.
Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, with that, we'll move down to the discussion of the Haplocenter energy audit. And I believe we have Christie here to present, and you'll do the introductions, Keith?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce a couple folks who we've been working with for some time now. McKinstry came or worked with us last year on this proposal to conduct a energy efficiency audit of the Haplocenter. We know that many of the systems out there are at end of life. We cannot find replacement parts if they were to go down. And we're going to talk a little about some of that detail today, but I want to introduce Christy Hoffpower from McKinstry, Lance Funk from and Scott McGann, who have coordinated the presentation today. And I'll kind of turn it to them to offer the presentation. But the purpose of which we're meeting today is to kind of give an overview, a reminder to the public of the importance of the Haplocenter as an asset to Franklin County, not just to us as a business entity, but to the community. Every event that we can host out at the Haplocenter fills hotel rooms, generates restaurant revenue, economic activity. That was kind of the primary function of that center out there. And if we continue to allow our capital needs to be deferred to a later date, the cost of that continues to escalate, and the conditions of that building continue to deteriorate if we're not keeping up with technology and not keeping up with energy efficiency of that building. Secondly, and I believe they're going to talk a little bit about this today, is there is some state legislation, Clean Building Act, which is going to require us, it requires every building, not just publicly owned buildings, but privately owned buildings as well, to meet certain energy efficiency standards. And failure to do that would result in some significant financial penalties for the county. So it's, I would say, urgent may be too strong of a word, but that's pretty close. We're not at crisis level yet. I mean, we were able to host events there, but there are leaks in the roof from problems with ice and snow damage during the winters that needs to be repaired. We know that there's insulation in the building that has failed as a result of time, and there's some cleaning and things that need to take place to make that building more attractive. Right now, we don't have air conditioning, for example, in the arena section of the building, and so that renders that large space somewhat unusable during the hot summer months. And so we're losing revenue as a result of not being able to have that capacity. So at the global level for that building, we know that there are some significant needs to upgrade and improve our environmentals in that building, HVAC and lighting, and some of those kinds of things. And so this process that we're going through, we have a contract with the State Department of Enterprise Services. They have already gone through the contracting process with individual companies that provide this energy audit service, McKinstry in this case. And that saves us a lot of time and effort with respect to contracting, making sure that we have met all of the state legal requirements for competitive bidding of public works projects. Those are very time intensive and expensive and fraught with a lot of risk if you don't do it right. So by having this relationship with the state, we eliminate all of that risk to the county. And this is a process that's been used by local governments all across the state of Washington. City of Pasco, Pasco School District, Columbia Basin College have all used this process to contract for these kinds of services. So with that, Christy, I'll turn it to you and you can go through this presentation and then we can address any questions that the board may have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and thank you, commissioners. I'm going to just talk a little bit about where we're at in this process and some of the drivers for why you might want to act now, and the overall project goals, which Mr. Johnson has touched on. And then my colleague Lance Funk is our energy engineer, and he's going to talk about the details of the next step, which would be an investment grade audit of the facility. The process that we're talking about is energy savings performance contracting. It's a Washington State procurement process. We started this about 2 years ago. Last year, we did preliminary feasibility study of the building. We presented that audit to the commissioners last March. As you stated, this is a partnership between the Department of Enterprise Services, Franklin County, and McKinstry. They've assigned an energy project manager from the DES. We did the preliminary audit, presented it last year. We talked a lot at that time about the condition of the facilities, the damage that had been done to some of the equipment. The next step in that process is to give a proposal for the investment grade audit, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Could you remind me, please, what the acronym ESCO is?
That's an energy services company.
Okay.
Which is McKinstry. So last year, a lot happened and a lot of things got put on hold. A lot of uncertainty about the county's revenue and et cetera. Now we're a year ahead, and as you've been talking about, there is a lot of federal money coming. There are state grants, and then there's also stimulus money coming from the federal government. A lot of the other counties are using that money for infrastructure improvements. Money that's spent on construction returns many times over in terms of the local economy. So doing construction projects is a great way to help the economic recovery of your area. The cost of borrowing money right now also to agencies in the state is very low. It's less than 1%. So that's another reason to consider doing work now. And when you compare that to the cost increases that we're seeing on construction materials right now, waiting to do work later is not very financially advisable. So some of the costs of not taking action now, as Mr. Johnson mentioned, the lack of cooling in the arena limits when that building can be used. There's one large vendor specifically that would lease out that space for 2 weeks every summer to have a learning convention there, but they can't do that because there's no air conditioning right now. So when you look at, it's not only just the lost revenue, but the hotels, the restaurants, all the economy around there. If you can keep that facility, this is an asset that the county already owns, but having it sit vacant is not getting the return that you could out of that building. So also being able to subdivide that space, it's the advantage is it's a very large open space, but sometimes if you could divide that into smaller sections, then you could have more, you could have multiple events going on at the same time, or you could rent the space to people looking for a little bit smaller space. So those are all the reasons why you're not getting as much rental income or economic advantage out of the building as you probably could. The 50 to 80% of the equipment is beyond its useful life, or it's in poor condition. Some of that equipment's been damaged. Right now, it's still functioning, but if that should need emergency repairs, those are much more expensive, and it could potentially affect the activities that you're trying to put on at the space. You also have very high demand charges on your energy. I'll talk a little bit more about that, and just some things that make it not as attractive. The parking lot lighting, it's not as lit up as it could be, and it's also very expensive to maintain because of the old technology. So a lot of high cost to maintain, to operate the building, and then lost revenue. The third reason why you want to look at it now is recent legislation for the state, and there's going to be penalties. So this building is subject to the Clean Buildings Act. It's over 50,000 square feet, and there's penalties for not hitting those targets, and I'll talk about that. So this is a preliminary utility data analysis. So what this is showing on the left side is the energy usage of the Haplocenter building. The measurement is called an EUI. It's the energy usage intensity, and it's the amount of energy consumed per the square footage of the building. That's a combination of natural gas and electric. This combination is 66 EUI. On the right-hand side, 31 EUI. This is what the state is saying a facility of that use and that size should spend in energy. So you have a delta of about 35 points. It's almost double the energy usage that the state's going to require for the Clean Buildings Act. Because it's over 15 points high, you are eligible for some early adopter funds. I can talk about that. You need to be 15 points or more higher in order to be eligible for those. It's 85 cents per square foot of the building. The total energy cost right now is about $134,000. If you hit the target of 31 at the same ratio between gas and energy, you would save about $71,000 annually.
Just a quick question.
Mhm.
I see it says the Clean Building Act's target. Is that also the point at which any penalties from the state would kick in? And are they linear, or is there some sort of a gradual effect on those?
Yes, so the penalties kick in if you are over 31, and it is $1 per square foot, and it doesn't matter if you're 1 point over or 35 points over. You're still going to be charged the $1 per square foot.
$1 per square foot of the entire facility?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on the data analysis? So the timing, you're going to be notified that the building falls under the legislation on July 1st. Also on July 1st is when you can apply for the early adoption incentive program. The way that works is you can apply, you need to do the audit to determine where you're at against the target and have a plan for how you're going to get the EUI down to the target level. Then you can submit for the early adoption incentive. That money gets reserved, does not come to you up front. It gets reserved after you've completed all of the improvements and you can show that you hit that EUI for 1 year. Then you would be in compliance, and then you could get that money back as a rebate from your utility. So the date for this building would be June 1st, 2027. So you have some time. You have some time to do the audit, find out where you are, look at what measures it would take to get you where you need to be, implement those, measure that in order to hit that 2027 date. But there's a lot that has to happen between now and 2027.
The early adoption incentive funds, are they being held or sequestered with the PUD? Is that why it comes back to us as a rebate from them rather than from the state?
The state gives the PUD credits that they then pass on to their clients.
So would we get that as a cash reimbursement, or would that be credit against our utility costs going forward?
I believe it's a credit going forward.
And Christie, please clarify, in order to meet that target, you have to be a year in compliance. So we're back
Yes.
into 26 now.
Yes. And you want to make sure you hit it, right? So you don't want to go into your year of measurement and find out that
You're 1
that
point
you're
off.
So, so yes, so there's time, but there is urgency to specifically to know where you're at, what it's going to take to get there, and then you can plan for that.
Well, I just know it's going to take more than physical improvements to the building. There's going to have to be operating policies and procedures that don't leave doors open, big roll-up doors in an air-conditioned space. So, thanks.
Yes. This is just showing you what those penalties would be. So starting in 2027, there's a base penalty of $5,000. And then after that, it's $1 per square foot annually. So you can see how quickly those add up, that cumulative over just 3 or 4 years, you're up to almost $500,000. So taking all of that into consideration, there's a couple objectives of this project. One is to reduce cost, operating cost. It's the cost of your energy. It's also the cost of your maintenance, increasing cost of maintenance because of the equipment being at end of life. Also, we'd like to add cooling. Obviously, adding cooling doesn't reduce your energy cost. It increases your energy cost. So that's kind of our job, is to come up with a project that balances out. Can we get enough savings, LED lighting upgrades, some of the things that Lance is going to talk about, insulation, improved higher efficiency HVAC to bring those costs down, add the cooling so that we can have the facility that's usable all year long. And then these things balance out, increase profitability of the facility, and then also economic improvements of the businesses that are around and tourist dollars. So that's kind of the overall goal, what we're trying to put together in the project. It can be phased, and Lance will talk about that. So maybe phase these projects, maybe address the things that are most important first. But before I turn that over to him to talk about that, I just want to say, like I said, with low financing rates and federal money out there, the cost of construction right now is just skyrocketing. So every year that you wait and put that off, just financially, I don't think it's going to make sense. So again, back to the process. So we have an audit proposal. We're here to talk about the next step would be this investment grade audit. And I'll let Lance talk about the scope of that audit.
So as Christy mentioned, the next phase is an investment grade audit. And what that investment grade audit does as part of this process is it allows us, the ESCO, in this case McKinstry, to develop a guaranteed scope, budget, energy savings, and performance for this building, to come back to the commissioners with an energy services proposal, implement this project with a 100% guaranteed project. As we go through this, we will have to do a full detailed energy model for the building. This is a computer software that we go through and essentially digitally rebuild the building and run it through its paces to make sure that you will meet or exceed that UI target. Along with that, we'll pursue grants and rebates from the state, which between now and the date, in 2026, when this building needs to begin its compliance measurement and verification period, continue to run down any new grant opportunities that the state may let out in order to help public entities meet this new directive from the state. Along with that, in order to maintain a guaranteed project, we have to do design to different points on different scopes of work. So some scopes of work that take minimal design will be fully designed and ready to go as part of this process. Some of the scopes of work, mechanical namely, will be somewhere between 60 and 90% designed. The reason that we give that caveat is due to the fact that we will have equipment selected. We will have major linear feet, duct sizes ran. However, final permitting will not be done. And usually small details will be fleshed out once we're into construction. The reason that delineation is important is once we give the guaranteed cost and go into construction, we can finalize that design while ordering long lead equipment, which as of a few months ago has almost doubled in lead time. Nearly all equipment due to semiconductor shortages across, well, not the nation, globally. So it's very important to get to that guaranteed number as quickly as possible. That way we can mitigate those lead time risks as much as we possibly can.
You mind if I ask a quick question here? You've used the word guaranteed like 4 or 5 times, and it's very reassuring, but I'm assuming you mean guaranteed equipment performance, because the human equation, operating practices, despite really outstanding work by you all, could be defeated by poor operating practice. So when you speak to a guarantee, are you talking about systems guarantee or total energy usage? Because you really, I wouldn't think, have control over total energy usage.
So what we'll develop is a detailed measurement verification plan. With that plan, and as part of the energy services proposal, we will detail out a schedule and set points for HVAC, a lighting schedule, and occupancy report, and make our energy savings calculations based off of those set points and schedules and that operation.
So the guarantee is predicated on following that schedule.
Correct. Okay. Now, that being said, if we get 6 months into that measurement verification period and the county decides that, hey, the Haplocenter needs to be 2 degrees cooler in order for it to work, or we don't need to cool it as much, or the occupancy is different, it could be a number of things. The county would then let us, McKinstry, know, and we would modify those calculations and that savings to reproject. Now, in this case that we were trying to meet or exceed this House Bill, well, what was known as the House Bill 1257, now is known as the Clean Buildings Act. The advice would be is prior to making those changes and those operational changes, we can recalculate those energy savings and estimate what your target EUI will be, and then help give advice on the operation of that building from that point.
Yeah, and that's an excellent answer, and I appreciate it, understand it, beautifully said. I was speaking kind of to the cases where we have a vendor that comes in to do an expo or something, and they put up the 14-foot roll-up door, and the thing is open all day despite an operating plan and policy that says that it won't be. So there's some unknowns there, but you really, I think, answered it very nicely, and I got what I need. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, next. So in order to implement this, as you saw on the earlier slide showing where your EUI is currently over double the target, a large portion of that building, roughly 50% of it, was designed to be an outside arena at one point in time, and got walls added on, some minimal level of insulation, and recently just had a concrete floor put in. The reason I detailed that out is that building was not designed to be heated or cooled and is currently being heated. With that, the insulation value that we would need to add in order to add cooling to that facility would be R38. And there would be envelope sealing, potential infilling of garage doors, sealing of vents to control outside air into the space, to maximize the efficiency of that space in order to try to meet this EUI target. With that, we've been walking the facility with Mr. Johnson and Mr. French multiple times here. We've come up with we call it a preliminary facility improvement measure list, otherwise known as FIM, of what the priorities are at that building, whether that is for reliability of operation and future revenues or energy savings. The current priority list, based on both failing equipment revenues and making progress towards that EUI target in the event that we need to phase the projects, is LED lighting upgrades, both exterior in the parking lot and in the building. This will allow you more controllability and lower your demand charges. This will have a very high impact to your energy bill as well as your EUI target, and increase the reliability of those systems as you do have failing equipment on a regular basis and a rather large service contract to go through and replace those as needed. Next would be the snow repair for the roof and to correct your ice shedding liability that you have now. That ice shedding is currently damaging, tearing off snow breaks, destroying HVAC equipment, and as a potential liability to patrons of that facility. HVAC and controls in both the Expo Center and Atrium are the next on the list at this point. Those are due to the system's reliability. They are at end of life and they have the potential for failure, especially during the summer months where your arena is already offline. You could lose most, if not all, of your revenue generating capability at that facility if those systems go down. And as Mr. Johnson has brought up before, your emergency costs to repair those systems are much greater than a planned project. Again, the next, it would be envelope improvements facility-wide. The reason that envelope improvements and insulation improvements are actually ahead of the HVAC and controls in the arena is because we have to bring that building up to current energy code standards prior to adding cooling. With that, there is large energy savings from getting rid of the few remaining single pane windows and doors in that facility, replacing overhead doors to increase insulation value, filling in doors where they're not needed, and reducing your overall unconditioned outside air in those spaces. Next would be to attack the HVAC and controls in that arena. With that, we can heat and cool that space, potentially partition the space into 2 smaller zones, further reducing the conditioning needs and increasing the flexibility of the space for revenue generation in the future. Now, the last item on this list is PV solar. PV solar is included on this list, one, for its potential for a Department of Commerce energy grant, and partly is solar can offset your building's overall energy usage intensity target. This building has the unique attribute that it has 2 utility meters. With that, you are capable of potentially installing up to 200 kW worth of solar on the rooftops. We would need to do a structural assessment to determine that it can in fact hold the solar. We would need to repair the roof ice shed and snow shed issues prior to putting solar on the roof. But it has the ability to lower your EUI target drastically. The reason that it is the last on the list at this point is after adding cooling to that facility and finalizing the operation of how that building will operate with vendors and with vendors using the space and not, that solar will be used to offset the rest of the way to ensure that we get past that EUI target point.
So you lost me when you said that the solar would reduce the EUI target.
Oh, sorry.
The target doesn't change.
My apologies.
It would reduce consumption from the existing
Correct.
energy sources.
It would lower your EUI past the target point.
Okay.
At this point, without going into the investment grade audit and doing any level of design, I cannot definitively say whether the solar will be needed or not to guarantee that you get past it, but that is why it is included at this time. So that way, when we go through this process, we can determine if and how much solar would be needed to ensure that you do surpass that target.
So if I recall, Washington is still a net meter law state.
Correct.
So is there potential for us to get credit back against our target if we found a way to do even more solar, say on the adjacent building? It's more a hypothetical than an actual suggestion.
Yeah. The utility, you would have 2 net metered arrays, so you'd be able to receive the full energy savings benefit of those arrays at that facility. However, with respect to the Clean Buildings Act, I'm unaware of any incentive of beating the target other than your energy savings on your bill.
Okay, that and the increased likelihood that you meet it even when things aren't going perfectly.
Exactly.
Okay, and as long as a third array were to be tied to one of those two net meters, it would qualify.
You cannot break the 100 kW threshold per meter for net metering. However, there is an option to do larger than a net metered array, depending on the baseline energy uses of. If you would like, I can give you more.
That's a question for down the road.
Yeah.
I was just curious what the opportunity.
There is a potential, and I can discuss that with you.
Okay, great.
If you would like.
Yeah, thank you.
As long as you're using it on site, it's a good way to go, but for the grant, they limit it to 100 kW.
Okay, yeah, you did say per meter. Okay, thanks.
Just a note on the grant that we were talking about, it limits each entity to $350,000
Welcome.
of grant.
To join a
monies.
conference now, please enter the attendee access code.
It limits each entity to receiving $350,000 of matching funds. The minimum match point as of last year was a 1-to-1 ratio. So that being said, if we, all right. So as part of this project, we brought in the fee for the investment grade audit at this time. The fee is split into two portions. The first portion is to get to a rough order of magnitude pricing and energy savings on the facility improvement measures that we had just discussed to determine the county's appetite to go after all of these different facility improvement measures and whether we approach it as a single larger project, phased approach, as we had discussed earlier, based on funds available. That second number up there, the $47,600, is currently the budgeted amount for the investment grade audit. With that being said, if we go through this project and we determine that we need a more efficient HVAC source or additional scope not already, that has the potential to be amended along with the criteria for implementation and DES to reconvene at that rough order of magnitude review to reassess what that cost effectiveness criteria states to make sure that we are addressing the county's needs with the most recent information that you have available.
So
I have it.
the Haplocenter, in my thinking, is more than one building. There's a second one behind it that has an arena with ice. It's on its own meter, I suspect. Or can we group two buildings, giving us 3 meters?
So currently the state identifies a building, not necessarily by the address or the meter, is by 4 exterior insulated walls and shared interior conditioned space.
If we wanted to do, and I'm not suggesting we do, but want to do the other building, would there be, I would imagine the state would be happy to.
Isn't in any early adopter incentive at this time. However, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Christy, they have been in discussions about lowering or further or going after buildings lower than that $50,000 threshold.
I don't know how big that building is. I'm sure it's less than 50,000 feet. Tom, what is it, like 25 maybe?
30.
30? Okay.
36.
Correct.
That'd make it bigger than the expo hall. Anyway, that answers the question. Thank you.
Yeah.
And they are already talking about the next tier is 40,000 and then 20,000.
Okay.
But right now it's.
Just kind of focused a little bit on this net meter issue. I mean, not every state is a meter state, and so there's.
Well, there still would be potential for grant funds as the, Department of Commerce Energy Grant or Department of Commerce PV Solar separate and apart from the Clean Buildings Act to further reduce the energy consumption at the ice arena or other facilities that are under that 50,000 square foot.
Yeah, I think the nature of the use of that separate building is unique and presents some real energy potential savings because of its use.
When we did our preliminary audit, we did look at the ice rink, and obviously there are some things that could be done. For the purposes here, we've excluded the ice rink. We're just looking at the other buildings.
Yeah, no. Got it. Kind of looking to the future, but maybe it's a separate project in the future. Okay, thanks.
proposal, and that we would be asking for a resolution.
Yeah, I would just interject here that the request for a authorization really is my request or
Yes.
mine working with Tom. It's not McKinstry's request per se. I know we certainly respect and appreciate together because this requires a lot of technical analysis that is beyond the scope of our own staff. And so my recommendation here today is to get generally consensus from the board that you're supportive of this concept of moving forward with an investment grade audit. And then we would bring back a actual resolution for the board to consider. I'm not sure we'd get it done by next week, but within the next couple of weeks, we bring it back before the board for a vote.
Commissioner Mullen, do you have any questions?
Not at this moment. I think I'd rather talk with Tom to get what his opinion is of it. Mr. French.
He's asking Tom if you want to weigh in on this a little bit and offer your opinion. Please, if you wouldn't mind, come to the microphone. Thank you.
So, I mean, I know they just downloaded a lot of information. The reality of the building is as many uses as we have, and it's, you know, take the non-COVID year out, we're shoving everything into half the building. Now, when we poured concrete, the amount of use that arena saw prior to that was typically 2 to 3 events a year. That has increased exponentially, but we're having to shove those events and try to force them into the later part of the year where it's not as hot in there. We can manage it by cooling. I believe there was one part of this presentation that's not 100% accurate. The arena was never an outside arena. It was always built with the 4 walls, roof, heat. It just had the dirt floor. There is an outdoor arena behind it. Ability for me to have, you know, this equipment is to the point, it's, if not original, very close to original to the building. And in order for me to be able to continue to be competitive, attract new events to that location, we have to have an operating building, but then also the amount of money that I'm spending on demand charges to be able to turn the lights on, the air on, the heat on, with that system being so old, we're spending a lot of money where we really don't have to if we upgraded the building and the energy usage of the building. So not only does this allow me to host more events, which is good for the community and the economic impact of the community, but it also allows us to do it in a more frugal manner while we're using the building, turn the lights on and running the HVAC.
So you only have HVAC in the
HVAC, where do you have the HVAC? It's only in the
Expo Center and the atrium. It's not in the
atrium
arena.
and the expo center is the only place we have air conditioning
Yes.
And how long has that been there?
since they built it.
Since they built it?
That is original to the building. I can't tell you, as I sit here right now, and I can give this answer, if the current units that are there are original to the building. You know, I don't think they are. I think, honestly, in the beginning of the first few years, it was swamp coolers on the roof.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I don't believe they had air conditioning in the building when they first built it.
But it was after those were swapped out to the units that are on the south side of the expo hall. They're on the ground.
Okay.
Some of them, and then some of them are on the flat roofs. And as these snowstorms are getting increasing in intensity, it seems like every year as that snow and ice shed off, it's hitting those units and causing.
That's that global warming taking effect. Enlighten them a little bit about the costs that we're incurring right now for emergency calls for the HVAC and for the other things, the lights. What kind of costs are we incurring?
So all of our lights are non-LED. They're the fluorescent with ballast. So we currently have maintenance agreements in place with different companies that they come in and they change the filters out in the HVAC. I'm not I'm not an HVAC repairman, so I could use all the technical terms, but they're
Sure.
watching over it, identifying issues. But the problem with that is that if a motor burns out or, whatever piece and component of that current HVAC system goes out, that's not covered under the maintenance contract. So there's a separate fee for that. The same with the lights. The parking lot lights are really poor. They're really tall, and I don't know why that was originally built that way, but they're ballast run lights. And with the age they are, those lights, for me to keep my demand charge down, they just are left on because we don't have, they talked a lot about being able to phase and turn different areas on, which is what a new system would allow us to do that. Some lights would come on and a few minutes later, more lights would come on. It's an all or nothing proposition right now. And most of the time we pay more demand charges than our actual usage charges, which causes us to burn ballast out, to burn these really giant fluorescent light bulbs out. That's not covered under the maintenance agreement. They'll maintain it. But if there's something that's burned out on a Wednesday, we have to call them out. It requires a lift and a call out. So those numbers can get pretty steep depending on, obviously, not everything always breaks, but when it does, it seems like it does.
What is the average cost per year for the maintenance for the
So $34,000 for the HVAC is our current maintenance agreement, and then $16,000 to another company that manage the $16,000 also it's our signs on the road on Road 68 and I-82, and then also the lighting system. But the maintenance agreements are always going to be there, probably not to the level they are now. If we were to have more modern energy systems, you still have to have a maintenance agreement in place to manage them.
How many events are we turning down because we do not have AC in the arena?
So just we have turned down for the arena. There's six here. Now this is in the summer months, so just for a few months. But some of these are multiple events, but it's under one promoter. A really large corporation that wanted to do teacher training, but it was required the entire building, the total building use. And that was going to be multiple throughout the summer. There's actually a cheerleading company that is nationwide. They came once. They weren't able to use the arena. We told them it didn't have air conditioning, obviously, at the time of the contract. I don't think they really believed us, or they thought it was going to be as warm as it was in there. So they have not come back. We have several ag trainings that happen that we have to that want to be there. They can't go into the expo hall. Just the tile floor, it tears the tile floor up, and plus the way those ball lights that we have that we utilize to try to manipulate the lighting in that room for aesthetic purposes, they're better suited to go into the arena. And there's multiple of those trainings that don't happen. It's just simply too warm in there during the summertime. We do have one concert promoter that does not seem to care whether has air, heat, or not. But we've had to turn away several concerts that would have happened in that space due to the heat. And then we were 3-on-3 basketball tournaments. We were approached constantly about those, but those are multiple events. And then the big one though that I was really hopeful to get was the USA Track. And I don't know if that's their entire acronym that they use for that organization, but they wanted to put an indoor track in essentially and host some USA track and field games in there. That's a summertime proposition, but they wanted to do it in this part of the Pacific Northwest, and we weren't able to host that due to not being able to cool the building.
Tom, yesterday you mentioned the teachers and what they wanted to do.
So that was going to be
Yearly.
There's a company that does continuing education for teachers, but this company would bring teachers in from all the neighboring states: Utah, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and as well as Washington. The location, what got them talking to us is just the location of the Tri-Cities, how it's central, it's easy to get people in and out of here as you're talking about that multi-state, bringing people in from those multiple states. We actually booked one training with them, and we had to change the event once they got here. And again, they knew, we declared, hey, this is not air, we don't have any air. Once they showed up and saw it, we had to kind of manipulate the training and try to shove everything onto the expo side and atrium side of the building. So it wasn't big enough for what they're wanting to do. That is multiple times throughout the summer if we were able to get them back. And there's a lot of, there's not only just the building rent, but food as well with that, which is profitable for us.
Sure. No, thanks for pointing out the fact that these events that we're passing on aren't capable of being held in the expo center, and that it does require the entire facility. Any idea of how much loss of revenue we've had over the summer?
It's six figures. I can try to get, I mean, we don't, some of it we don't always know. We can say room rent. I can get you a pretty definitive answer on room rent, but we don't know the menu item they were going to choose.
Sure.
Or what the alcohol sales were going to be. Right. So the number, I can get you a number on that to the best of our ability. It just obviously wouldn't have the total package of what the revenue we would have received. But that's also to include the lost revenues to the hotels.
Sure, and the restaurants.
Tourism,
yes.
So with that, Keith, would there be any cost share from Pasco on this?
Not on this. No, they're obligated to assist us with operating expenses, normal utility bills. They participate in those. So they would benefit to some degree.
Some? I disagree with that. They benefit greatly with the motel tax.
Yeah, certainly the economic impact. No argument there.
We get nothing out of that. And we fill those motels up and they're reaping the profits off of that facility, as they are off those soccer fields and baseball fields that we just signed a new lease for $1 a year.
No disagreement
And
there.
now we're in need of repairs and we're short on money here.
Has the city been approached as far as sharing the cost of this?
No, we could certainly have that discussion with them. They also have some stimulus money that they're allocating, so they may be willing to participate.
So just a note that the city owns the soccer fields. They don't lease them from us. The city invested a lot of money to develop the softball complex. It's on the land they lease for $1 a year. And that brings in business to the community. So it's a good cooperative arrangement. Tom, just a basic SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats suggest to me that, the strength is we've got an existing building that provides a service to the public, generates revenue, and puts people in hotels and restaurants. I think that's all pretty obvious. The weakness is that we've got an old facility with old inefficient systems, and we're under threat from new state law. Opportunity I see is that we've got federal money that can be applied to pay these costs and make these improvements. And the city does as well, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were willing to participate. We've also got the opportunity of additional business by improving these facilities. We've already discussed that. But the big one to me is the threat. We've already talked about the targets and what the state fines would be $1 per square foot. Let's not forget that the state has the capacity and I think the desire to continue to ratchet down the energy use and improve efficiencies. So what we're looking at today is, I think, stage one. So I don't think we should overlook the threat of, if we don't meet the current target, what's the target 2 years from now and how hard is it going to be to meet then? So everything about this to me says that it makes perfect sense. We've got a known risk of $1 a square foot penalty, and we can fix it largely with federal money and generate more revenue. I wish I could have a personal business plan that had those opportunities in front of me. So just my thoughts. What do you think about that analysis?
I agree. I mean, I hate to make it sound so elementary, but it is what it is. I mean, the building is a large economic driver to the community. And I know there's political points of view and there's personal points of view on the building, what it was originally intended for. And I'm totally sympathetic to all of those But this community is not what the community was in 1995. It has grown, it's evolving. We have an opportunity right now to take an asset and make that asset bigger. I've been in this role for almost 6 years and very little capital money, which is fine. But I know what I've done without the capital support. I also have a very strong understanding of what this building could be to the community, to the county, to the city with some capital improvements.
And Tom, this is why I've beat the drum on the fact that I don't like to see us with the Haplocenter as a break even. That's why we've got to put some resources in the bank for these type of situations. As a property owner of buildings too, you either maintain them or the people quit renting them. And that's where we're at with this. This is 13, this is, I think it was presented that we have 50% of the facilities or the HVAC and everything else that's failing.
The current equipment.
It's got to be replaced. And 30% more, that was what percent?
At 80%.
At 80%. So
Which
how do
is
we get to this point? We're not maintaining our asset. There's no money been put back in this building. We need money going back into this building. That's why we got to turn a profit.
Correct.
We can't
We're
be-
maintaining it at a very high cost. We're not improving it. But that is correct.
And this is where we're at now. Now we're at a very high figure here. And we've talked about insulation yesterday. And I have already called the gentleman, and he's going to come down this next week, and we're going to look at that and the avenue there. Also the LED lighting. I think that's something that we could really start off with. Of course, we got to go through this other phase of the audit first. And then the LED lighting would be something that would show good faith in moving forward and doing something to meet this HR, what is it, 1457? 1257. Yeah. So
If we're going to continue to own the the Haplocenter, we're going to have to maintain it and improve it in order to attract more business here to the Tri-City. So I'm in favor of the audit as long as we're going to keep the facility. I mean, if we're gonna start being fined for not keeping it up to date and meet the energy codes, then
yeah,
And
Kind of a
obviously that's not-
no-brainer, isn't it?
it really kind of is. Yeah.
That's a question. The status of that building is above my pay grade. But I'm not in competition with other privately owned
Right.
event centers. No other private event center has a 50,000 square foot facility.
It's the largest facility in the Tri-Cities, isn't it, as far as?
It is, and the largest unobstructed, I believe, unobstructed without pillars in the room and different things in the Pacific Northwest.
well, let's get one thing straight. It's not a 50,000. It's 134,000 square
When
foot
that bill
building.
comes due, that is correct.
It's 134,000 square foot. Keith, what year were those soccer fields and those baseball diamonds put in?
Before my time, but it would have been probably the mid-90s.
And so as a good faith, we gave them $1 a year rental for all them years. And now we just renewed it. I think that they've recapped their investment on all those baseball fields, soccer fields. We should be returning ourselves some money off of that because again, they're getting the hotel motel tax off of that. We're getting nothing but $1. And I think they've recapped their initial investment.
Yeah, I might suggest that that's a separate discussion, but it is certainly a worthwhile discussion. to
It's
have with the
revenue
city.
that
Yeah.
could help us pay for this.
And again, for the benefit of the people listening, the soccer fields are owned by the city. They don't
Exactly.
lease them from us. The only thing they lease from us is the little patch of ground that the softball fields are on, which bring business into the community. Just want to make sure the record's correct.
How many acres, Keith?
I'd have to look.
More than a little patch of ground. It's quite a few
Probably
acres.
10 acres.
I think it's more than that, if I remember right.
Have to look.
All right. Any other, I think we're in consensus.
Sounds like we have consensus.
Yes.
So I want to thank McKinstry for taking their time to be here. Excellent presentation, and we will bring a proposal back soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, we'll move on down to public comment. Is there anybody on the phone, Keith?
No.
Anybody in the room, public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on down to office business, vouchers.
We have one fund expenditure. I move for approval of fund expenditures in the total amount of $792,543.87 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by 2 representatives of the auditor's office and the county administrator.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Takes us to the consent agenda. I believe we have just 2 items on the consent agenda today.
Move for approval of consent agendas 1 and 2.
Second.
Motion and a second. I'd like discussion on the consent agenda items 1 and 2. And the discussion would be on number 2. And is Mr. Mahoney on the phone?
Matt, are you still on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Matt, it's about the bridge there on Ironwood.
Yes.
And I would just like, my discussion point on this is as I travel that road, Garfield, up to Ironwood, I want to, I know I've been very hard on you on the reflector strips, but I want to compliment the road department on the installation of these solar panel warning signs and stop signs. Those are very effective. As I travel that road up Garfield and I hit Ironwood where that bridge is going to be put on, I just want to give you a good kudos for that installation of that. And are we planning on putting more of those in? Because those are very effective in alerting the drivers of a stop sign.
Yeah. First off, certainly appreciate that, and I will pass that on to staff. And yes, we do plan on putting more of those in.
How expensive are those? Sort of putting you on the spot here.
Matt, don't we get them funded through the federal safety grants?
Yes, those are part of the new package of safety money, which uses a very data-driven corridor type approach. Correct.
All right. Well,
Matt,
thank
how
you.
long have we been doing those?
We've been putting lights on stop signs and stop ahead signs for quite some time. We've really just recently switched to the solar panel, and then of course wrapping the posts themselves with the retro-reflective strips. That's a fairly new thing for us. You're starting to see the Washington State Department of Transportation and other agencies are doing that as well. So it's a really good way to highlight those stop signs as people are approaching them.
Just want to say good job. Thank you, and keep up the good work. So with that, we have a motion and a second for the consent agenda. 2 items. All in favor, say aye.
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 With that, Keith, we're down to administration office business.
Yes, thank you. The first item is a support for a letter to Senator Cantwell regarding earmarked funds at the federal level, submission of a support letter for the East Low Canal Odessa Water Project. They are asking for some money. When I say they, the Columbia Basin Development League is asking for federal money to participate in planning and design of continuing to replace ground well water with surface irrigation capacity. And this board has consistently been in support of those kinds of projects, and they've asked for our support to send this letter to Senator Cantwell.
You just need a consent from the commissioners?
Yeah, and approval to sign the letter.
I support.
I support.
Second one, we've talked a little bit about before. It's a letter of concern to the Federal Aviation Administration regarding the Scout Clean Energy Project that's being proposed in the Horace Evan Hills in Benton County. We, in discussions with the port in particular, who is responsible for managing the Pasco Airport, this energy proposal would have wind turbines in excess of the 400-foot interference level for aviation. And so that has the potential of interfering with airport operations. And because the Pasco Airport is so critical to Franklin County from an economic standpoint, as well as a regional and actually national transportation standpoint, we took the position that the FAA really needs to study that, and we're opposed to any project that would interfere with air traffic in the Pasco area. So again, it's just asking for your authorization and signature on this letter.
So consensus again?
I support.
You support, Mr. Moore?
Well, I had recused myself from the Scout Energy Wind Farm because of my involvement with them, but this is totally different, isn't it? Where it's talking with the FAA.
It's part of the same response. Yeah, so if you've recused yourself prior, you may want to
Yeah, I'll
not
recuse myself from
put
it.
your signature on this letter.
I support.
I think that's all I have for office business this morning.
Keith, there was one thing I asked you to put on there, and that was the committee for the American Rescue Plan Act.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, I maybe should have been more clear. Yeah, we'll meet with the auditor and the treasurer before we bring any proposal to the board for consideration.
And Tim from the auditor's office. Yeah.
Yes, when I say the auditor, I mean, not only Mr. Beaton, but his staff.
Yeah.
And same with Treasurer Kelzer.
Fantastic. That takes us back down to public comment again. Is there any public comment? Anybody on the phone?
No.
Okay. Any other business for the good of the county?
I would just mention that, and maybe for the benefit of the public, that next week will be our evening meeting. That will be held at the Haplocenter. We will have a public hearing discussion on the comprehensive plan update. I know that's an important issue for many folks in the community. We've worked on it a long time, and we'd like to get that moving, but that will be held next Tuesday evening, 7 p.m. at the Haplocenter. And I think we're set up to.
And the following day, we'll have a meeting. Go ahead.
I was going to say, the next day, we have a joint meeting with the Benton County Board of Commissioners, also at the Haplocenter. That will be 9 a.m. Wednesday morning, June the 2nd. And we will be discussing the idea of a referendum to reduce the transit tax in exchange for increasing a mental health tax to help fund mental health services in the Tri-Cities area, Benton and Franklin counties.
All right. With that, the meeting is adjourned.